So we're going to move on a little bit. We've got the whole back of his vest still needs to be made. And I have this thing set to be surface onto Noman, but or Noman, I think is what I'm calling him. But I have him also just hidden, so I don't have to see it. I know the general idea of where this is going. I have roughed in the basic borders of it, so I don't need to see that when I'm building it. Again, this guy gonna get in the way after a while. Now we just want to clean all this up, make sure it's a nice flow. Everything's nice and quadded, and areas that are going to be deforming are not. There's not holes in. I'm going to delete half of his body here because I want to do some edits on his actual form of the character guy. I'm just grabbing the head right now so I can break it off. Do some edits and just to the head. I'm just gonna export this out so I can take it into ZBrush. I like doing most of my edits in ZBrush for this kind of stuff. We want to make it not suck. So first, yeah, we just bring the character in. And then I'm just going to use under the deformation area, I'm going to just smooth it out a little bit so I have an easier surface to work with. Add a few levels of division to him. Now we're just going to rough in some of the basic skull shape of this guy's face. And maybe some of the meat. So smoothing out these areas that got a little pinched. And then starting to draw in some of that cheekbone. Smoothing out some of his, he's got a little bit of chipmunk cheek looking right now. And I wanted to find that chin a little bit better. So really at this stage I'm just kind of drawing out shapes and then smoothing them, and then drawing them again and then smoothing them and drawing them, smoothing them. Make sure that we don't have too much of a lumpy look, even though at this point it doesn't matter too much since we're just exporting base shapes back and forth between Max and ZBrush. I want to draw on the lips a little bit too. Just overall, he's looking a little bit bland and generic, so we just want to start getting the basic form of his face. Soon we'll be making scars and all sorts of good stuff on him, which will be adding a lot to the character, but for right now we want to get his just overall form and look to him. So you have a couple different options in ZBrush on how you want to do symmetry. Just by hitting X, Y, or Z, you'll turn on symmetry on those axes. You can also use the Smart Resim to go on either one just by toggling that on under deformation, which we'll use later on. But for right now, just having X on for sculpting is fine because it's such low res. It's only, I think, at level 3. I want to make sure that cheek is pretty defined because in the design it looks pretty pronounced. And his eyes are looking really thin, so I'm just adding a little bit of depth and stuff there. A little bit of fat folds on top of his eyelid. I want to adjust that mouth some, it's looking a little funny. So at this stage, we're really just blocking everything in. We've blocked in a lot of the costumes so far. We still have a jacket, gloves. The pouches are right now just boxes, but for the most part, we've roughed everything in, so I can kind of look at that rough face and say it's time to start doing some detail. And he has enough geometry to his body and face, so I really don't think I'm going to have to worry about going back in and retopologizing these areas, other than making the scar area. We're not going to just be able to get away with that with maps. It's a pretty deep scar, and I want to go a little further along with it than even Hong's design was. Adding some of the sharper details now. Trying to keep things as organic and smooth as we can too. Has a little bit of a bird mouth right now, so we'll have to adjust that later on, but it's okay right now. Want to add a little bit of form to those lips. May end up being easier to edit some of this stuff in Max, open his mouth a little bit so we can do some lip detail. We'll do that later on. Okay, his chin was getting a little bit wide there, so I just kind of brought it in a little bit using the move tool and some fall off and local shift, or focal shift, excuse me. To make sure that the fall off is nice on the brush. Won't be too harsh of a move. Defining some of this brow area is important too. Don't want to have too much of an expression on him, but I'm going to have a little bit of one on this character. If this was for a production, I'd have to make sure that before I turned it over to the guys who are doing facial animation, that it had a more of a generic kind of face on him. I don't want the brows to be too angry, or else he's going to be permanently angry. But it can be a little bit boring to only build a face in the generic pose all the time, so sometimes I'll have a little bit of an expression and then soften it up before I turn it into the final. So we're getting pretty good with the head right now. Really roughed in a lot more form to it. Starting to look more human, not just like a mannequin. Looks like he's got some bone structure with some meat on top of it, which is good. And we're going for a little bit of a stylized look on him, so we don't have to be too much of a slave to real anatomy, but we still want to keep everything, pretty believable if we can. A little more of a comic book character, though. So we can have a little bit of fun with the forms. Maybe not that much fun. Scale tool is something I haven't really found too much of a use for yet. Okay, I need to open this mouth. It's looking a little bit pursed. I'm just going to draw a little bit of a mask around there. And then invert it. I'm just start sketching in that top lip a little bit. We're still going to take it back into Max to make this lip look a little bit better. I'm not too happy with the way it's turning out. It's getting kind of funky. But at this point, the most important thing is to rough in everything that we're going to want to work on. define those brows a little bit more. They're a little soft. Don't want to go too crazy with them though. Okay, he's a little bit further along. Overall, just adding more form to his face and head and cranium. I like to make the back of the head and anywhere the hairline is just a little bit bigger than I'm gonna make the than I would do it if he was a bald character, because he's gonna have hair, and it can be a little bit strange to work with this character when he's just got like a normal skull size. If the light hits it weird, so it's a little bit bigger than normal is usually what we'll do at Blur to make the hair kind of feel fuller. So now that we're back in Max, I'm going to adjust this to fix that lip. I really don't like the way the lip was looking in there. And I had just gotten to a point where it's a little too far along to fix in ZBrush without a lot of work, so then I could do it a lot quicker in Max. Adding some edge loops, and we're opening the mouth a little bit so I can draw some of the detail inside the mouth later on. Then using the loop tools in set flow, it kind of smooths things out a little bit nicer. I also want to make sure that the inside of the mouth has a little bit of form to it as well, because later on we're going to have to build a mouth cap for him where we can put the teeth and everything. And that can be really a pain in the butt when everything's overlapping and crisscrossing inside. So we're just going to clean that up a little bit and make it a little easier to work with. And we can do that by selecting each edge and moving it down, or using Max's ring and loop select tools, where you can kind of grow a ring, as you can see here, by holding control and clicking the down button or up button depending on which way you want to go. So that's a little bit cleaner inside. And we want to make sure that the mouth doesn't, has a little bit of form on the inside of there too. Kind of a U-ish shape. We want to define the outer ring of the lips a little bit too. It was getting a little thin on the top. So we're just going to keep working on this lip edge. I've got my constraints on to edge right now, my move constraints. So it'll make sure everything flows along with the edge structure. Sometimes when you come back from ZBrush after hitting the cage button, it'll do some weird things like just push a few verts on top of each other and make some weird pinching, which you need to fix in Max. And it's really quick with some of the loop tools options in the poly draws. It'll make sure that you can just hit set flow and center, and you can fix a lot of those areas. Now his mouth's open a little bit more. It looks a little bit better to me. It doesn't have to be that open, really. I just want a little bit of room so when I take him back into ZBrush later on, I'll be able to add some detail on the inside and it won't just be guesswork. I'm going to relax a few areas that are getting a little bulgy. So his brow area too needs some work. And just the overall structure of the eye I wasn't really thrilled with, so we're going to play with that a little bit too in Max. I want to keep that kind of little fold of fat above his eyelid. Having reference really helps in this area. I've got a mirror that I keep an eye on. No pun intended. Maybe a little. And then a few areas here, I didn't like how I had my edge loops, so I'm just going to adjust those. It's important to think about how he's going to animate and make sure that there's going to be enough room for wrinkles and expressions to form. So we really want to make sure pretty soon that we're matching up with Hong's design, but we still have a lot of stuff to do with just the form of the face before we have to really worry about too much of that. Just going to adjust the fall off settings here and add a little bit of a pinch so I can relax his angry brow a little bit. Speed things up a little here. The overall structure of the head was feeling a little strange to me, so I'm just going to adjust a couple more things there. And once again, that eye structure, I want to just keep working on these. Just kind of zoom around, zoom out, look at it upside down, look anywhere that looks a little strange to you. I think it's helpful to kind of look at them from all sorts of different angles to make sure that what you're doing really matters. Now here I'm going to use the measuring tool to make sure the distance between the eyes and the distance from the eye to the end of the head is all about equal. Otherwise he'll start looking a little bit strange. And he was a little bit off, so I could adjust a few settings here. And then we could be doing a lot of this in ZBrush right now as well. But we've worked in there a bit, so I figure it's time to work back in Max a little bit. Since the overall structure is still feeling a little odd, I'm going to put an FFD on his head. Make sure it's below the symmetry so I don't have to worry about both sides, just one side. And I can just move this around to adjust everything just to where I want it. Really change the entire look of the character really fast with these. And it's nice because you can snap back and forth between the two by turning the modifier on and off in the viewport. And make sure that what you did actually matters and actually helped. You can see he's got a few things in the symmetry modifier that are pinching. That means that basically our edge loops are not even in the middle. So I'm going to grab that whole edge loop, turn off soft selection, and then just constrain it to X and scale it on that axis, and then that'll make sure everything's flat. So now when we look at it, it should be a little bit better. The structure of the head looks a little funky there, but he will have hair pretty soon. We're actually going to draw in some quick poly hair pretty soon to make sure that even though his head might look a little strange in some angles, that make sure it actually looks like he's got a full head of hair. Later on we'll do real hair with using hair effects. But first I want to make sure the structure of the head looks decent. So once again, looking at him from all angles to see those little points that look a little funky. Okay, overall he's looking a lot better. So now I'm just going to start a new object, select the head that we made, and using the build tool, I want to rough in the kind of the overall outline of his hair. This doesn't have to be very fancy. It's just that when we render him from a distance, you'll get a kind of an idea of what it'll look like when we put the real hair on him. So I'm just going to do this really fast. Build one polygon here by using the build tools, by inserting verts onto the head and then making that into a polygon. And then just using normal max stuff, we're going to just duplicate that by holding shift and moving. And roughing in the really just a general outline of how the hair is going to flow around his head. You don't want to spend too much time with this part. This could also be a stage where you start to do poly hair if you didn't want to use hair effects, but his hair is going to be a little hard to do just with poly hair, and I don't think it would look too good. With image planes for clipping and all that. I don't know. I've never been a big fan of the way that stuff looks. And hair effects is a pretty good solution for making decent hair, especially short hair. But this is a nice quick way to rough in the general outline and make sure that he looks like how he's supposed to look before we worry about actually putting effort in on the hair. It'll all make sense in a moment. Once we've built a few, we can actually just start duplicating them instead of having to worry about making them from scratch every time. But these ones are great for the side hairs. We got those top ones for the kind of comb over look that the guy had. A little bit of the sideburns going on here. Even if it clips into the ear at this point, it's okay, because we're not going to use this for anything except for just our own general guide. Maybe you'd show a supervisor and say, is this kind of how you want the hair to go? Or you could also do it with renderable splines if you wanted to. Just like we did for the laces earlier. Now that we have a good half the head done, I'm just going to use the mirror tool. We'll first duplicate that whole side of the head, then use the mirror tool to just flip it over, then line it up. And it's a quick way to kind of rough in the entire look of the hair. And then I want to attach it all together because there's no need for this to all be different objects. And the last couple little hairs we're going to put on here, just to get that part in the middle of the head there. And then some areas kind of float a little too high, so just using the soft selection we can move stuff around pretty quick. Coming up on the end of this chapter pretty soon, so just a few last things we need to do. Still not quite sure about the size of that eye. I want to double check it again. Looks good. Delete those. We don't need them anymore. And then we take a look at this concept. We can see this nose is a little bit different than what we have right now, but we'll fix that up later. A lot of times when I'm doing head modeling, I won't even really worry about too much stuff until I get to the actual texturing stage, because so much of the character is brought out in that level. So in the next DVD, we're actually going to do some modeling as well to make it look a little bit more like the concept. But the big stuff you really want to make sure you get now, which obviously is going to be that scar and other areas. So, in Photoshop, I just took a quick crop of that image, and I just took a quick reference of what the size was pixel-wise. I'm going to draw a plane in max. It's like, as you can see here, it's about 440. Just by going under Info in Photoshop, you can see what that's going to be. And we're going to use this as a background plane for modeling to make sure that the head basically lines up. So make a plane, which are those dimensions, and obviously it's much larger than we need, so we're just going to scale it down uniformly. Move it roughly in place. Open up the material editor and add a bitmap to this plane and use the front image and make sure that it's on, displayed in the viewport. And we go under the display options and turn on material color under shaded. And then we want to scale this in to about the size of our character's head. See, that's still a little big, a little off, but it's getting close. Could turn the head on to see-through so we can actually see the whole image beneath and make sure the chin, ears, and eyes and overall head structure all match up. And any big areas that jump out at us, like the ear difference right there, is pretty large, so going to adjust that first. The chin should be out a little bit more. That neck, he's got a little bit thicker neck than we've been working with. And his ears stick out a little bit more than we wanted. We're going to fix up that nose a little bit too. A little too thin as it was. Now I'm about that level where I can close that mouth. I still want a little bit of openness to it. And just at this point, we're overall just moving everything to be roughly in place. You can see he's got a lot more head cranium shape to him because of all that hair. So I kind of have to guess where the head and skull should actually go. Turn the renderability off on that plane too so we can do test renders. And then we want to make sure that ear is a little bit closer to how it's going to look. The neck too, it should be a little bit thicker back there. It's curving a little too soon. Using the pinch tools, we can make sure that we're only getting the little lobe right there. Okay. That's looking a lot better. We've got most everything roughed in at this point. Except for the jacket, which is a big part. We'll do that in the next chapter. So we take a look at this and kind of see where we're at. The arms are a little too straight right now, so really quick, just putting a soft selection on, because we're going to build a jacket in the next chapter. I don't want it to be quite so stiff. I want to have a little bit more of a relaxed default pose. So I'm going to set the pivot to be screen mode, and that means I can just kind of align where I want the pivot to be based on where my viewport is. So to close this chapter off, we're just going to take a look at Hong's design to see what we have left. We still have to build the jacket base mesh, and then we have to bring all of this stuff into ZBrush so we can just detail the hell out of it, and then bring it all back into Max to retopologize so it keeps a good edge flow, and it also just adds all that detail we want to add without relying on maps. So I'll see you guys in the next chapter.